All right, Mike Bohn joined now by Jon Anik on a very special day, John. It is my 10-year anniversary with USA Today, MMA Junkie, and as many people may think I like to make things about myself, I actually
Ha!
don't. But I think this is a special day to kind of be celebrated. And you were the first person who gave me time for an interview in mixed martial arts so many years ago, and look at us now, right? It's been a long journey on both ends, but I really appreciate you doing this. How's everything?
Well, hopefully you're not going to intersperse video of us 10 years ago because I'm always going to be much older than you. But oftentimes these days I find myself being the oldest man in the room. But yeah, you certainly jogged my memory when you softly reminded me that you were a decade in. And yeah, I mean, you were just a kid. You will always still be just a kid to me, but it's great to be with you and reminisce a little bit because a lot has happened in 10 years. I think sometimes our heads are down and we hit the pavement every weekend and we fail to look up and sort of smell the roses. So it's good to reflect a little bit whenever we can.
Well, think about this, John. It was so long ago we didn't even do a video interview. It was over the phone. So, when was the last time someone requested for you to just do a phone interview? I'm sure it's been a minute too.
Very rare. We always got to go on camera. Sometimes we have to wear glasses when we have an eye issue as well. But yeah, it's amazing to think back, and certainly you and I go way back, but to some of those formative years for us journalistically, and for me, not to go too deep down a hole here, but yeah, I mean, I was doing print journalism, before probably you were even born, right? I was doing it at a time where there were next to no resources, laying out agate pages in newspapers in a very archaic way. So I'm glad we are where we are talking to you at a hotel room on StreamYard today.
Yeah, exactly right. I'm in Dallas here, not even for an MMA event. I'm here for Nate Diaz versus Jake Paul this weekend, which is a whole evolution of combat sports in itself to be at a fight like this. But I guess before we talk about that at all, I mean, what a freaking weekend, man! I came here from Salt Lake City. That was probably one of the best cards I've seen. I mean, I know we always are kind of prisoners of the moment, but did that feel like a special one to you?
What a month, bro. Like, what a
Yeah.
month it has been. UFC 290 card of the year, followed up by another one that I think is in that conversation. A lot of fans wanted us to spend 45 straight minutes of our podcast this week, leading off just on Justin Gaethje. And we actually tried to do it. And I think you can. It's just amazing what he has done. And he just deserves that moment. Not unlike I felt like Dustin Poirier deserved a moment like he had knocking out Conor McGregor. It all felt like it ceremoniously built to this moment for Justin Gaethje, and couldn't happen to a better dude, right? Could he be any more unassuming and just genuine and the real article? So I love Justin. I love Dustin. But what a way to cap a huge, lively fight week and live event. I mean, you can certainly speak to how festive it was. And, Salt Lake City, Utah, they don't want fight nights, Michael. They want pay-per-views. They got 2 inside of 11 months. And I think it's a 3-fight deal. I think we're going to be back next year as well.
Beauty. Yeah, that was an iconic finish, man. I think we were all like anticipating a war there. It was building up, the momentum was kind of going that way, and then just ends in the snap of a finger. I did not see that coming at all, and I know Dustin said he didn't see the kick coming either. But does that feel like one of the more iconic finishes in recent memory, and just something that none of us expected, really?
Oh, for sure. And as commentators, sometimes you feel like you're settling in for a fight that is going to be longer. And then something happens like that, and it really throws you for a loop. And then all of a sudden, you're trying to provide what is going to be the historical soundtrack for this huge moment. And it's happening way before maybe you thought you were going to have to do it. I would hearken back to when Rose Namajunas knocked Zhang Wei Li out in their second fight. It's like you feel like you're hunkering down for 25 crazy minutes. There was so much anticipation for that fight, and then in a blink, it's over. So, yeah, dude, it was absolutely insane. And this sport's ability to deliver is something that we could spend a lot of time on. And just if I could for a minute, right? And
yeah.
There's no guarantees in life. There's no guarantees when you put what looks like bulletproof matchmaking, perfect main event on paper that it's going to deliver. But correct me if I'm wrong. Like the UFC can feel pretty good about its ability to deliver more consistently on its biggest stages than most of these other sports, right? Like I went to a Super Bowl that was 13-3, New England over the Rams. And as a Patriots fan, it was the tensest thing I've ever seen in my life. But most people believe it was the worst Super Bowl of all time. And I don't know, man. It's just, I have a front row seat for all of this. Yes, the promotion cuts my check, but it just feels like show after show, pay-per-view after pay-per-view, this sport's ability to deliver is like few others. And that's why we've experienced such crazy exponential growth domestically. I'm not talking about your Canadians or what we've done globally, but this sport has never been stronger than it is in the U.S. right now. And the athletes really deserve all the credit because pay-per-view in and pay-per-view out, they're just putting on a goddamn show.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And yeah, Gaethje, just for him to come back, it just showed the maturity in him as well, right? Like we know that first loss to Dustin was a turning point for him. He's lost some fights since then, but that was one where he needed to evaluate, and I think kind of honed in his style a lot. And I think this was the expectation of that. You hear Dustin talk about it in the aftermath. He said he really didn't expect him to fight on the back foot and move around that much, and I think it surprised him a little bit, and he certainly wasn't anticipating that kick. So for Justin to have evolved like that, it makes me really excited to see him fight for that title again, no matter who comes out of that fight between Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira.
Yeah, no, I think you put it well. And Justin Gaethje, when he fought Dustin Poirier the first time, April of 2018, it was his third fight in the UFC, and that shouldn't be lost on people. Now, yes, he had 5 successful title defenses as the WSOF champion, but look at the strength of schedule outside the UFC compared to in the UFC. So he was still building at that point in time. And the reason why he probably had a great first contract with the UFC, and by the way, to any professional in any walk of life, you're always a victim of your first contract. But I'm sure he came in and made money right away because he came in as a guy who was ubiquitously regarded as the most watchable man in MMA, the most exciting fighter in the sport at the time. And he deserves credit for building that foundation. But as the challenges got stiffer in the UFC, I think he and Trevor Whitman were going to have no choice but to make a pivot and be more selectively engaged and, be chaotic, but a little bit less so at times. And man, they certainly had the athlete who has the IQ and everything else to accomplish that feat and to present Justin Gaethje 2.0. And to your point, yeah, I agree. I think that I'd be excited to see him back in there against Charles Oliveira. Obviously, he is a fresh opponent for Islam Makhachev, and I just hope he waits, right? Unless they dangle some crazy number for him to, fight somebody like Conor McGregor. I really do hope that Justin Gaethje will wait because while he does have 2 belts at home, interim and BMF, I'm not sure he really cares about those 2 belts on the mantle that he has at home right now.
Yeah, the undisputed is the most important. And it feels like he's a lock to get that, unless 2 situations happen, in my opinion, right? Like if Charles Oliveira beats Islam Makhachev, do they go to a trilogy fight? And where does Alexander Volkanovski come into this, right? Dana White said after his win that they're pretty much going to defer to whatever he wants to do next. And it seems like he wants to be fighting for that lightweight title. So it's still, I don't know, it seems like there's maybe some hiccups or possible alternatives involved there. What do you kind of see as the lay of the land, obviously depending on what happens in this lightweight title fight?
So if Charles Oliveira wins the title, I think we can all probably agree that it would be a finish, right? Not to suggest that he can finish Islam Makhachev, nor
Right,
to make this proclamation that he can't beat him over 25 minutes, right? But Charles Oliveira is the most decorated finisher in my mind of all time. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of things at play. Initially I was thinking Alexander Volkanovski, this result with Justin Gaethje is maybe not a great result for him in terms of the pecking order for his rematch with Islam Makhachev. I think if I'm Ilia Topuria, Justin Gaethje result is perfect for me because I'm probably going to get Volkanovski next. That's not informed speculation. It's total speculation, but I think that's the direction in which they will go. You're right. If Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira are 1-1, that would open the door for a trilogy. But Justin Gaethje, as I mentioned, probably the guy who people believe is the most watchable, the most exciting. I'm not sure how that sort of plays itself out at the pay-per-view window or in terms of the internal metrics. But I would think as a promoter, Mike, you'd be trying to get Justin Gaethje in an undisputed title fight because of just how incredible he is. The fan base really seems to resonate with him. He seems to move every needle. I think they would be trying to rush Justin Gaethje into a title fight, right? Like if you would suggest there are other guys that maybe they don't like, Bilal Muhammad, my man, right, who is the number one contender, who maybe they're not rushing into a title fight. Justin Gaethje would be the opposite. They'd be trying to rush him into a title fight. So, yeah, I think he's going to get it, despite what, timeline might be in his way.
Well, speaking of potentially rushing into title fights, Alex Pereira, man, what is going on? This is one of the craziest runs ever, right? Like he's already seemingly 10 MMA fights into his career, looking at the doorstep of being a 2-division champion. Can you think of anyone who's kind of asserted their position in the company and in championship contention in multiple weight classes this early into a UFC career?
Well, Israel Adesanya became a Hall of Famer as quickly as almost anyone. Certainly there are other athletes, Conor McGregor, but Izzy, really, things happened quickly for him. Henry Cejudo as well, but nobody like this. And I think Alex Pereira understood that it had to happen quickly. He's 36 right now, and you have been in front of him a lot. Every time he is talking about championship stakes and big fights, oftentimes he says, I'm 36 years old. This needs to happen now. So they did believe that when they got Alex Pereira to the UFC, that it was sort of make up for lost time, get him into the big fights quickly. Has the most tremendous inner circle and coaching staff that you could possibly want to have isolated there in Danbury, Connecticut. And he has reaped the benefits, right? We've been hearing Glover Teixeira talk about how physically strong he is in his defensive grappling since his second UFC fight. And look at the way he was able to handle the body triangle and the rear naked choke and have the gas thereafter to be able to handle Jan Blachowicz at altitude. I couldn't have more respect for Alex Pereira. I do believe it's going to be him and Yuri Prochazka. Yuri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill is like a promoter's dream type of light heavyweight championship. And this one is right there with it. But I don't believe Alex Pereira has closed the book on 85 either. I think way too much has been made of his struggles to make the weight just because he's a bigger man. How often has he needed the towel? Maybe a little bit, right? But how often has he needed the extra hour? Never, if memory serves. So he's a committed athlete. Commitment I have in all caps on my Alex Pereira fighter card, and just happy for him and the whole team.
Yeah, he said as much at the press conference when he came and talked to us that he wants to do the Izzy fight. If they do an MMA trilogy, 5th fight overall, that it needs to be at 185 because he thinks that's only fair. It kind of breaks up the story a little bit if they do it at 205.
Well, there you go. Yeah, again, I do think that there was a little bit of a promotional push to get him to 205. And let us not forget what's happening in this division right now. To quote my colleague at ESPN, Chael Sonnen, has never really happened before. When we put like a championship timeline on a graphic for a UFC telecast, it never looks like this with all these vacancies, right? And as Chael was saying, part of the reason they're not putting an interim belt on the line is because they can't even crown a goddamn champion right now at 205 pounds. So certainly that has helped Alex Pereira, that 2 of the more devastating injuries in the division's history have happened to the incumbent back to back. But certainly the UFC, I think, was wise to push him in this direction because the division's wide open and now he's in a position to capitalize.
Yeah, I think if he fights Yuri, that's probably a fight of the year contender right there before you even see them get in the cage. I'd be shocked if that was anything other than an absolutely insane fight.
Yeah, and they're building that title fight around Yuri Prochazka. And if you want to sort of say that I'm calling him the A side in that equation as the former champion, then that is fine. But they have wanted to do right by him from the moment he injured his shoulder. And circumstantially, it has worked out that Jamal Hill eventually will vacate that title and nobody will be the champion when Yuri Prochazka comes back. And I guess in some part, maybe that is fitting. We don't know what Yuri Prochazka's timeline is. We have seen him deadlifting heavy weight now within the last 24 or 48 hours. But Mick Maynard and Dana White have been and Hunter Campbell have been very frontal about this. Yuri Prochazka deserves to fight for the belt. And, he'll be the guy with the red corner whenever that fight happens.
Last thing on 291, how big of a priority should re-signing Derek Lewis be for these UFC matchmakers in the brass?
Man, what a way to bet on yourself, and great fighting instinct there to get that switch knee home, right? I think maybe it speaks to some of his experience over all the years. If he doesn't necessarily want to acknowledge that, that is fine with me. But yeah, man, I mean, they love to headline heavyweights, and he's obviously made a lot of money. And again, I don't know like what his value is to them in terms of the television metrics, right? He was going to fight on a prelim, got elevated to pay-per-view, maximize the showcase. But given where the heavyweight division is right now, you have a lot of guys coming up. Tom Aspinall, Sergey Pavlovich. I think it's in great current form. It'd be great to have a guy like the Black Beast, Derek Lewis, be there. So I'm hopeful that they re-sign him. And I got to think that that's what's going to happen, right? With respect to our competitors, even though maybe that Francis Ngannou rematch looms, all the big heavyweight fights are in the UFC right now in mixed martial arts. And hopefully the Black Beast recognizes as such.
Did you think for a second there that we were about to have the UFC knockout record broken? Because when he landed that knee and De Lima went down, it was like 2 seconds into the fight, 3 seconds into the fight. I thought for a second, I saw Jorge do an interview backstage where he said he thought it was going to happen right in front of him, which would have just been mind-blowing.
So funny. You are opening my mind a little bit. This is the first time I've actually thought of that. And I guess thankful for Jorge Gamebred Masvidal, that was not his reality to watch the record go down right in front of him. No, I guess I just thought because Pezau's so damn tough that I thought he could even rally through that. Like I thought he was hip escaping when he was actually just trying to cover up and get the referee to come save him. No, I didn't think like that because I have so much respect for Marcos Rogerio de Lima, but man, that's just an insane result. And Pezau was like at the height of motivation, biggest fight of his career, right? Like all of these crazy results have different circumstances. And if you add to the circumstance for Derek Lewis, he was a betting underdog here, supposed to fight on the prelims. Pezau's never been better, right? Finally, Pezau on the cusp of like the big fight, and he gets it and he loses in 33 seconds. This sport is insane, just insane.
Yeah. Unforgiving, as we see every single week, man. And you head to Nashville this week, right?
Yes, sir. Wheels up to Nashville in the morning. No rest for the weary.
Yeah, exactly. Big ESPN again. What do you think of this main event? I mean, Rob Font comes in and kind of saves the day against Corey Sandhagen after Umar Nurmagomedov suffers his injury. This is a big one at 135.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for us to sit down with Rob Font this week. Certainly, he expedited things. He was supposed to fight Song Yadong, as most of your viewership knows, in 2 weeks on August 19th in his hometown of Boston, Massachusetts. And that comes with its own pressure. I can assure you, for him as a Massachusetts native walking out into the jungle, right, there's a lot of pressure that comes with that spot, but it's just not nearly the magnitude of fight that this one is against Corey Sandhagen. You know, he goes from being a pretty big betting favorite, I would think, against Song Yadong to being a big betting underdog here against Corey Sandhagen, who is on the cusp of a title fight. So Rob Font can take all of that. Obviously, I think he has to establish his jab, and, I think he's got to be very mindful of Corey's long-range weapons. And for Corey, obviously, this is a different challenge than he was going to face in Umar Nurmagomedov, but this bantamweight division is great. It's not the lightweight division, though, folks. 155 is still the best division in MMA. But, yeah, it's a great fight in a great division involving two guys who just are at the highest level of the game, 5-tool players, no glaring weaknesses on either side. And, yeah, man, talk about bulletproof matchmaking. Corey Sandhagen, Rob Font, even though it wasn't the initial fight they put together. Pretty damn good, man. Pretty damn good.
Yeah, they did a great job. Sean Shelby saved that one big time. And it starts off a great month, right, for Bantamweight. Our next pay-per-view is headlined by a Bantamweight title fight. And what's kind of your feeling? I mean, sidebar a little bit, but it's Sean O'Malley's first pay-per-view main event, right? And I think this is going to be telling on how big of a draw he really is. Like, he does good numbers for us and stuff, but you just kind of don't really know the difference between when you see like backstage scrums and stuff, and then when you're asking people to pay $80, but it seems like he's been poised pretty well for this position.
Yeah, I think he's going to carry a massive pay-per-view. I think it's going to do huge numbers. I'm very excited that it has this Boston backdrop, as you might expect. And as great as Aljamain Sterling is, I don't think the quick turn is reflective in the betting line, at least right now on DraftKings Sportsbook. Aljamain Sterling is a huge favorite against Sugar Sean O'Malley. And if he had had 6 months and the requisite recuperative and recovery time, then maybe I could lean into that price a little bit. Sean O'Malley has a great chance to win a world title, even if this happened on Aljo's timeline. But the fact that this fight is not happening on Sterling's timeline, I think should be reflected in the betting line. And at least right now, I don't believe it is. Aljamain Sterling is one of the best grapplers and best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Maybe I don't need to lead with that. And while Sean O'Malley is a willing grappler, and I think tremendously underrated in that phase of the game, training with Augusto Tanquinho Mendez and Tim Welsh and everybody else, it's a pretty clear fight stylistically in terms of what each guy is going to try to do. And even if you want to suggest that Sterling's an underrated striker, you don't want to play around with an athlete like this on the feet. So it's a fascinating fight. And I'm excited to see what Sean O'Malley can do with the opportunity. I always say the most exciting thing for me as a UFC commentator is watching guys who've never fought for the title get that chance and ultimately break through. And we'll see if he can do it. I think the big difference between him and other guys that get to this point is that he's arriving at this point as a top 5 UFC superstar. And that is rare. So we'll see what he can do.
Yeah, and I think for Aljo too, this is a chance to be a bit of a star-making performance for him too, right? Like he can take that stuff from Sean, but also he got so much criticism for taking the way he won the title, obviously, but then the time off to do a quick turn like this after great performance against Henry. I don't know what you could say about him negatively if he goes in there and wins this fight impressively, defends that title again. It just seems like this is a big opportunity for him to just make everyone go shh a little bit.
He could lose by head kick 30 seconds in, and he's still the greatest UFC bantamweight champion of all time for me. Aljamain Sterling is criminally underappreciated, always will be. And I see you raise your eyebrows. Dominic Cruz is one of my best friends in the world, former 2-time UFC bantamweight champion. At this point, not that you even wanted to have the conversation, he's the only guy in that conversation with Aljamain Sterling, as far as I'm concerned. And Aljo's UFC body of work at this stage, just recently capped with a Henry Cejudo win, is impossible to compete with at this point in time. Too many high-level UFC wins for Aljamain Sterling for anyone else to compete with. So, yeah, man, there's no doubt about it. And the fact that he is stepping up here, right, because the promotion didn't hold a gun to his head. Like, yes, he was, I believe, forcibly pushed into this slot, borderline bullied into this slot, but they didn't hold a gun to his head, But it was a hard 25-minute fight with Henry Cejudo, and that shouldn't be lost in this conversation. And that's why I believe, as I sort of said, this heightens the challenge, and then it heightens the accomplishment. A win over Sean O'Malley is huge. It's absolutely huge. And I think all the elite bantamweights would tell that to you, on or off the record. They all acknowledge how good Sean O'Malley is, but we don't necessarily know how good he is in terms of being a 5-tool player and being tested against a grappler like Aljamain Sterling. I cannot wait. We could do 45 minutes on that fight alone.
Yeah, and I don't raise my eyebrows and thinking you're wrong or anything. It's more just I've never really thought about it that deeply yet. And I think you laid out a great case. I mean, most wins in the division's history. He's getting up there for finishes. I think there's a pretty damn good argument there. And he's beaten the 2 other people for the most part. I know he hasn't fought Cruz, but in Cejudo and Dillashaw that are pretty high up there on that list too. So I think that's a good point by you.
Yeah, the Cejudo thing, just not enough activity. And Dillashaw, I don't take every performance-enhancing drug user out of the greatest of all-time conversation necessarily, but in TJ's case specifically, as much respect as I have for him, one of the best, most skilled athletes I've ever seen in there, I think the transgressions were such and on such a level that I just can't have him in that conversation. So you really start to just pare it down, and it's not like some of these other divisions like featherweight where Jose Aldo, Max Holloway, and Alexander Volkanovski all have these tremendous cases. At 35, it's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, and how special is it for you to be anticipating calling a pay-per-view event in Boston, with Rogan and stuff? That's probably just going to be an extra special one.
It is, and we have done a pay-per-view together in Boston before, but I don't believe the sport was nearly at the level that it's at right now, right? It just keeps topping itself and getting to a different level. I cannot wait. I've never requested to do a Q&A in my life. I was like, you got to get me in front of those Bostonians somehow, some way. I just need to have a chance to address those my fellow Bostonians. So yes, I can't wait to be back and the hub of the universe. I was a former Boston Celtics season ticket holder, the 2002, 2003 season, 2003, 2004 season. So, and sitting in the nosebleeds. And to be calling fights on the Garden floor is obviously a special thing. So, yeah, we can't wait to get to the Bean, my man. Nashville first, but we're excited for later this month.
Yeah, this 30th anniversary year has just been delivering in spades, and we're getting closer to that 30th anniversary show in November, Madison Square Garden. That's going to be a big one, a special one too. And when I talked to you, it was like the 20th anniversary, right? That's the time just flies so quickly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, how do you feel just this year in general has gone? And as we build towards that moment, like, is that something that internally in the company and yourself, that 30th anniversary show in November, that's just going to be very special for, I guess, everyone in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I could give you an honest or dishonest answer here, Michael, right? Like
Let's
my
get the
head
honest
is
one.
down. We have 14 pay-per-views this year. There was a huge international lean during the first quarter. It's been an absolutely crazy year. And so much goes into each of these individual pay-per-views. Hall of Fame ceremony is thankfully in the rearview mirror right now. But for me, so much goes into each of these individual pay-per-views that I can't sit here and tell you, especially as a Bostonian, that anything special is happening in New York at Madison Square Garden. But no, I mean, honestly, man, like every pay-per-view, I get home after these pay-per-views and I fucking collapse, bro. So they all are the same to me. They all feel heightened. They all feel like Super Bowls to me. And that's a great thing. It's a great thing that we have 14 instead of 12. But it has been a special year in terms of the athletes and the results. And obviously, we've had a lot of our higher profile athletes from yesteryear along the road with us doing these Q&As. And we've had a lot of special footage honoring even some of my broadcast partners like Michael Bisping while we've been live on TV, which has been pretty cool. But yeah, these pay-per-views are such an endeavor that it's hard to isolate one over the other, my man, if I'm being completely honest.
No, that's super fair. And as far as like, you calling these fights, how's your process changed? When I think back to, when we spoke very early on and you were talking about the dry run you did for Dan Henderson versus Shogun Rua at UFC 139, which was still one of the greatest fights ever. You're calling that fight, obviously not on air. You're gonna pull out something here, but yeah, like how do you feel your process has evolved in readying for these events and calling them?
So I still am trying to figure out ways 13 years in to make my process better, to make it more efficient. I still eat almost every meal in my hotel room throughout these fight weeks. You should see my fucking room service charges, right? But these are my fighter cards that I just got out. And I have a fighter card library now that I didn't have behind me. And I'm just, but basically, I have probably 6,000 or 7,000 fighter cards now behind me. And I think that at times I've thought about digitizing my process or taking it to a computer, but I have kept at least the core of my fighter study the same, right? I do film study while I handwrite my fighter cards, and it's old school, almost the way I used to learn collegiately, almost with like a flashcard where if I write things out, it starts to commit some things to memory, and that'll help me not have to cheat my note cards on the broadcast. Certainly in terms of the conversations I have with fighters, I am much more aware of what to ask to extract things that I can actually use on the broadcast. Sometimes when we have these fighter meetings and somebody will ask a question, and I'm guilty of this as well, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but a question will be asked. And you know that the answer is going to reveal something that can't even be used on the telecast. So why are we wasting the time asking that exact question? So I've honed in more on how to get information out of athletes that I can actually use on the broadcast. But, there's so much television writing that goes into this show. And that is something that I focused a lot on. Even if you look at the locker room shots of Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier right before they go out, I want to maximize those 30 seconds. And I know you were in the building, so you probably didn't hear this, but what I said was, all right, coming up next, let the bodies hit the floor. And then I went into the rest of my copy, right? But like all that stuff takes time. All that stuff takes energy. All of that stuff takes writing concentration and writing ability. And I don't shortchange anything. And I don't think about what I'm going to say before I say it for the most part when it comes to anything on the walkout or certainly when I'm capping a fight. But most of my process has stayed the same. I've just tried to hone in a little bit more on, I guess, what I can get from a fighter and what I can actually use on fight night. But my system's not perfect. And constantly when I'm in my hotel room Friday nights before a pay-per-view, eyes bleed. And I'm like, what can I do better? What can I do to make this process more efficient?
Well, we all know you do a great job. And like, what's the difference between, say, like Israel Adesanya, who is fighting every 4 to 5 months? You know what he's doing, where he's from, his story pretty well, and someone who maybe has 1-2 fights in the UFC, and there's something that you want to jam in there and give the audience in terms of like knowledge about this person, how much do you guys, I guess at this point, have to like divide preparation between someone at that level who's very familiar and you called 5, 6, 7 championship fights for them, and someone who's on the come up?
I guess the biggest difference would be the film study. I have to study Izzy less on film than, let's say, who do we have this week? Asu Almabayev, 29-year-old flyweight out of Kazakhstan, making his UFC debut, right? Never seen the guy fight. Obviously, by the time, I crack a microphone Saturday, I will have seen him fight. So, yeah, I guess that's the biggest difference. But I also want to make sure, as you look at a blank card here, that I leave a lower third, even on a card like Adesanya, whose card will be completely packed, right? Like, this is my Kennedy and Zechiku card. At this point in time, it's completely packed, right? Oh, nice job zooming in, Michael. So that's my Kennedy and Zechiku card, right? And so by the time we get to fight night, I'll have a new card of Kennedy completely filled out. But by the time I get to Nashville, I'll want to keep a lower third blank, because even a guy like Nzechiku, who I've sat down with 6, 7, 8 times at this point, I still am going to get some new stuff out of him. And I want to make sure there's enough room on my fighter card for that. But this is the part of the job that I really enjoy. And certainly, even if I'm at Palm Beach County Public Library watching film, I do take a moment of gratitude. I know that sounds trite, but when I'm at the library is when I'm most grateful. And I say, hey, I'm sitting here at a public library instead of outside landscaping, being paid right now to watch Asu Almabayev. And, you know, I'm being paid to watch sports right now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, funny you picked Kennedy of all those people. I actually just talked to him last night at Fortis MMA as he was getting ready to finish his last training session and head out there. So that's very kismet there.
Hardest worker in the room, I'd imagine, last night.
Yeah, he was looking great. They do it very wild down there at Fortis. Safe Saud, as we know, runs a tight ship. There's the reason he's called the General, and you just go in there and it's always guys just banging out there. And he has a very nice way of guiding people in the room, and you can tell they're all just very attentive. It's everything you'd think it would be from seeing him corner on a UFC broadcast. So that was fun to go in there, and yeah.
Yeah, Daniel Cormier and I were doing some voiceover work in Dallas recently, and we got to go to pro practice at Fortis MMA. And I'll just give you one quote that night from the General Saif Saud to one of his pupils, okay? You're fucking fat.
Yeah.
I mean, no, as it started, it was like, dude, you're fucking late, you know? And then somebody else is like, okay, man, well, your fight's in 6 weeks and you're effing fat. So no, Saif is the absolute man. And to watch him coach live in that environment made me want to do gym visits all over the country. Although I don't know that anybody is quite on the level of the General.
Yeah, and no, to end the session, he made everyone circle around me and say 1, 2, 3, Mike Bohn to close out the training session. And I was one of the most embarrassing things ever when you have about 35 fighters just staring at you and he's hyping you up and stuff. But it was a very Saif Saud type of thing to do. So that was hilarious.
That's hilarious. That'll make you never go back though, right?
Yeah, maybe not. It's gonna have to be very worth it next time. I'm gonna be pick my shot on that one. But the last thing I kind of wanted to ask you about, you're basically in the MMA media now, right? Like, to a degree, of course, we know you're there, but you have a podcast, you're doing things like this. You do a great job with Kenny Florian, as we see in the background with your great branding there. But when do you look at like the media, and don't be afraid to be like critical if you need to be for someone like in my spot? What do you think? Do you think it's in like a good place when you compare it to other sports as well? How like the sport is covered, how the athletes are covered? What are your thoughts just as a whole, as kind of both sides of the fence trying to grow and evolve here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't consider myself MMA media. And even though sometimes I will refer to myself as a broadcast journalist, let me be clear for the entire audience, if I could. I am a promoter, right? And sometimes I'm accused of being a shill, and I do take exception to that because I've gone to great lengths to try to balance what my occupation is with, being somebody who is charged with communicating with the fan base in an objective way. So I do consider myself a promoter, but I try to do that in the most objective way. But ultimately for me, my job is about humanizing these athletes and trying to shine the most positive light on them as humanly possible. And that is my focus. As far as the state of MMA media, I mean, certainly there's a lot it's appetitive right now. I mean, there's a lot of people that are getting into the MMA media. I definitely think it skews younger than some of these other sports. And I think that can be a good thing, right? Especially because a lot of the new media is focused on video. And I do think that, the younger generation can get a bad rap too for like being disrespectful. Like I do believe for the most part, the young journalists really do respect the athletes. And what I do like is that most of the MMA media know the athletes and have a relationship with the athletes and are respected by the athletes, so that when they go to a gym visit at Fortis MMA, the athletes crowd around them and they chant Mike Bohn. And that's just not happening in any other sport. And that actually warms my heart, because I just think it speaks to the rapport that you have with these guys. And, even if I look at your relationship with Joanna Jędrzejczyk over the years, right? A future UFC Hall of Famer. And she was not at all that when you were cutting your teeth as a young journalist and establishing that rapport. And now you can get time with her anytime you want. And it's probably not because you're handsome, although maybe that helps, right? And so I think overall, like, I don't know, like I'm probably the wrong guy to ask, because I don't necessarily lean into like the state of mixed martial arts media, because I have so many different things going on. I think you guys have a lot of challenges that other media outlets do not. Even if you look at a UFC press conference and making sure that all the athletes are fed, so to speak, right? There's a lot of different things that goes into, being a combat sports journalist. But by and large, I think the state of the MMA media is pretty good. As long as they're respecting the athletes, I'm good,
Yeah, I agree. In the state of your career too, right? You signed that new UFC contract. I know you've like talked about before that you always feel your job was kind of on the line show by show. And I know that's kind of the way you do have to take the sport to a degree, just because it's always so fluid and you want to give each performance, just like the athletes, right? It's ultimate respect to be prepared. And I know you have a great process, as we just talked about, but do you kind of feel differently about the state of your career, the position in the company, that maybe you did a couple years ago, maybe before you signed this latest contract extension?
No, I think it's always going to be show to show for me, at least as far as my mentality is concerned. And maybe that's partially having to do with just health, right? I mean, because you still got to be healthy, right? Like for me, it's like my voice has still got to be there, right? I got to fucking go on TV with glasses this weekend because I'm dealing with an eye issue. So I'm always thinking availability, try to be there for them every show. I can always control my energy. And even if I don't feel particularly mentally sharp, I can always control my energy, and I try to bring it for them every time my number is called on a weigh-in stage, for a fight night, whatever it is. But no, I want to prove myself every show, and I just think that's always going to be my mentality. And the contracts go quickly, right? Like new deal, all of a sudden we're almost 1 year in and 3 years to go. And once 2 years expire, then you're in a contract year again, right? So the way I see it, it's like before you know it, 750 days, we're back in a damn contract year again. So, but yeah, it's just exciting to have this job. And Joe Rogan has said, I think the last two shows, we have the best job in the world. And gosh, if it doesn't feel like that for you, for me, for all of us, when those pay-per-views are beginning. So I'm thankful for this seat. I feel like I've never been in better graces when it comes to my relationship with Dana and the executives. And I'm very thankful for it. But I'm not blind to the fact that it could all be taken away from me on any given Saturday night, So, thankfully my line about the Mormons didn't get me fired. Right, Michael?
Yes, and some breaking news here, John. Just announced the 15th annual World MMA Awards. You are once again up for Personality of the Year.
Gosh, you scared me like Sandhagen Font was in jeopardy or something.
No. This is a good thing. Good breaking news and a credit for you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. But yes, you did strike a little bit of fear in me, because I'm sitting here talking to you live during a fight week, and we want this fight card to stay together, but I appreciate the nomination, and the nomination is the win for me as far as I'm concerned. I don't win too many popular votes head to head against Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier, but I'm very thankful for the fan support. And honestly, I just have to say, like, I felt so much love from the fan base over the last 24 months. And, it just warms the heart of me and my family to such an extent. So I thank people for that. And I thank Fighters Only for the nomination, to be sure.
Awesome, man. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it. I'm sure we'll do this again in another 10 years. Hopefully we can keep killing it, man. And obviously always appreciate your time on the road. You're always very generous to us. And yeah, you being, a supporter and a willing person to talk to me since day one. The first time I talked to you, I think I messaged you in a Twitter DM or something like that. And it was over the phone. And yeah, here we are now. on StreamYard, have covered so many events, been on the road all over the world together. It's a very special thing, and I appreciate the relationship that you and I have been able to form over the years. You're one of the best people in the game.
Likewise, buddy. Warms my heart to hear you say that. And maybe at some point, just for nostalgic purposes, we'll do a phone interview and we'll record it. It'll be audio only. But great to see you enjoy Nate Diaz. Hopefully Nate gets it done against Jake Paul. And we'll talk soon, my man.
All right. Appreciate it, John. And have a safe trip out there. And hopefully the eye heals up soon.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you.